Mark introduce himself. So let's just have a round of applause for Mark.
Thank you, folks. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. Excited to be down here in New York. So my name is Mark Roberge, Chief Revenue Officer at Hubspot. Mark asked that I give a little bit of background on myself, which many people get a kick out of because this is my first sales job at HubSpot. I'm an engineer by training. I started my career as a programmer. I've got a degree from MIT, so I've always kind of looked at the world through this lens of data and science and technology. And I'll tell you the background on how I stumbled into HubSpot, but you'll see in sort of the question and answering today that it was that lens that I really used to kind of rethink a lot of the ways that you might build a sales team and run a sales team today, so hopefully that comes out. But the roots for me at HubSpot started at MIT. I took one of those business classes that probably many of you took, an entrepreneurship class where every student shows up with a business idea. And I think there were 70 students in the class, and everybody submits an idea. I think 10 of them get picked to run with their idea, and everybody else jumps on a team. So I got picked for my idea, which wasn't HubSpot. It was this. It was a pet social network. Don't laugh. This is on how to get people to meet each other at dog parks and stuff. And this is.
I actually wrote a blog post that was a little bit facetious on social networking for pets.
Back then?
Yeah, back then.
Yeah. It was hard. It was hard to raise money, and I did raise $1 million, and ran that company during my second year at school there, and then thereafter. And one of my investors actually was in the class, named Dharmesh Shah. He's the co-founder of HubSpot. And his idea for the class was HubSpot. So I saw Dharmesh standing in front with the same logo, different value prop at the time. But that's how we got to know each other, and he ended up investing. And so he asked that I help with HubSpot one day a week, so that's what I did. I needed a little extra cash as I was a startup founder, as some of you are in the room. And I would go by every Thursday afternoon and just help him out and sell deals. And that year after school passed, and personal life kind of caught up with me in a good way. My wife was pregnant right after school, and then she had a baby, and then we got pregnant again 4 months later, which isn't recommended, but was a blessing in the end. And then we bought a house to put all these babies in, and just and I couldn't get my next round of funding, so the guys at HubSpot, which had grown to 3 people at the time, we're just we're about to raise a round, and we don't have a sales leader or person, so we'd love for you to come over and sell. So I put up my best Texas Hold'em face and pretended like my startup was going really well, and negotiated a good deal, and came in. I honestly was just thinking I could just collect salary for 3 months. That'd be fantastic. And for the first 7 years, I ran global sales and eventually took over services and support, and scaled that team to about 450 people, and got the company to 100 million in revenue. And we did do an IPO last year as well. So it was so far a good end to the story.
Yeah, and many more to continue. But I'm also curious because how many folks here are in a startup? Okay, so 1 or 2. But I'm really curious as to when you started, and you mentioned this in the book. Before you did anything, that first month, you closed 23 deals. I'm really curious, because I think a lot of folks struggle with, how do I get my first deals? How do I lock them in? What did you do?
Okay, so I'll break it down even from that month, because prior to that month, I'd been selling part-time for a year.
Sure.
So at the point that I joined, I probably brought on about 60 customers over the course of that year part-time, and we probably had amassed about 100 total as a company. I think the first phase is gosh, you just gotta lean into your network. You know what I mean? If you just need 4 or 5 beta customers, you're not cold calling for those. You have to network your way in, and we certainly did. But then once we got to that month where I did the 23, the big thing I learned in that month in particular was the whole notion of lead with your ears, not your mouth. And for sort of a tech engineer type guy, for the sales folks in the room, that's oh yeah, no kidding. But it wasn't obvious to me, even after quite a bit of education. My dad happened to be a sales coach, and he was the first to teach me that. I had a big advantage there, and that was the first thing I realized. And walking into the company, At the time it was Brian Halligan, our CEO, Dharmesh Shah, our co-founder, and Mike Volpe, our VP of marketing at the time. And he's a marketer, and he was essentially doing this himself. And Mike's an awesome friend of mine and an amazing professional, but he's not really a sales guy. And he was not closing 23 customers a month, because what he was doing was he would get someone on the phone that would, we had a decent amount of inbound lead flow at the time because Mike was so good, and he'd get him on the phone and just tell him what we were doing. This is so awesome, it's HubSpot, we're doing inbound marketing, this is what you do, and do you want to sign up? And that's not sales, even though, people who don't come from sales think that that's what you should do. And I see a lot of founders, I just met one last week, who wanted some sales coaching, and that's what he was doing. He's like so excited about his idea, he gets an awesome meeting, and he goes and tells them how awesome his idea is. And that was the difference with me versus what Mike was doing, is I went in and I led with well, why did you download that ebook? And what specific questions did you have about it? And what goals do you have? And how did you come up with that goal? And what happens if you don't solve that goal? And,
Imagine, listening to the customer.
Yes, exactly. So it's an obvious thing, but that was really the answer. And I see a lot of founders falling into that trap.
Right. So moving beyond that, I had a really good conversation with Andrew Quinn in our Boston group. And one of the things that we really honed in on was this whole idea of how to hire. Because that's the biggest challenge when you think about scaling a sales organization. You can have the process, you can have all these things, but if you don't have the right people in place, nothing happens. And there was 5 particular things that you identify in that process. How do you get to that? And what do you think are actually the most important of those traits?
Sure. So just to reiterate that process that Mark, the point that Mark brought up, sales hiring is arguably the most important execution element of the whole building a sales, group that you have to really crush. And what's weird about it is when you go out and talk to sales leaders and they're going into their day and they have this 9 o'clock meeting with the team where morale's in the gutter and they've got to pump them up. And they've got this 12 o'clock pitch with this big customer and it's going to save the quarter. And then they have this interview at 3 o'clock with a candidate. Where are they bringing their A game? And where are they going to kind of half-ass it? Right? They're probably going to half-ass the interview. And that interview, compared to the morale pitch, compared to the one big deal that could close the quarter, if that person is your next rock star and you missed it and didn't sell them on your company or didn't decide to hire him, wow, does that cost you? Or if you hired him and they turn out to be a dud and you wasted 7 months of effort into them, that is costly. So it's just it takes a lot of discipline. I fall in this trap too, but the hiring process, and this certainly applies outside of sales as well, it's so easy to half-ass it, but that's absolutely the critical element. And so the 5 components, I think it was the 7th hire I made, I was fortunate to grab the #1 salesperson from a public company in Boston at the time. A big company, 800 salespeople, this person was #1, and I convinced them that we were going to be the next big show. We were only 15 people in a garage. And it hit the press that we got this person. I was rolled out the red carpet. Come teach us to sell. #1 out of 800 people, holy cow. And they didn't actually crush it. They didn't do poorly, but they didn't crush it either. I was so surprised. And that's when I really learned this kind of science around sales hiring is the context they came from couldn't have been more different than HubSpot at the time. They came from this big, established public company with a well-known brand running Super Bowl ads, very transactional sell, to HubSpot where no one had a clue who we were, no one had a clue what inbound marketing was, and it took half an hour to describe it to them. Right? And you can imagine the person that's going to succeed in sales in that big company environment is way different than the person that's going to succeed in HubSpot environment. So I realized at that point that to come up and ask someone, hey, what do you look for in a sales hire, is somewhat of an irrelevant question. Because it's going to be different for me than you, than the person next to you. But there is a process to uncover what the right answer is for you. And so what I did was I wrote down the 10 criteria that I thought would correlate in our context. A new brand, evangelistic sale, relatively complex. And I defined what each one was and what a score of a 1 and a 3 and a 5 and a 7 and a 10 would feel like. And then I was disciplined around scoring each of our candidates, and especially our hires, against that algorithm. And it was really interesting after 5 or 6 hires to see them evolve in the company, some of which became rock stars and some of which were mediocre, and go back and reflect on that interview process and see, like, what is the pattern here with the rock stars? Like, what is it about them that's correlating with success? And what is it about the mediocre people? And what am I missing from this whole algorithm? Again, it sounds really obvious, but I walk into every company I advise and they don't go through this check-in every 6 months, right? So it wasn't long before, and if you're going to build a big sales team, you will have enough statistical evidence to run a regression analysis, which sounds fun to the PhDs in the room and scary to other people. And be able to start to statistically correlate your observations to success. And when you're going into a year, hiring 40 or 50 salespeople in a year, that level of sophistication is quite comforting, right? So the 5 criteria that Mark spoke to that correlated most in our environment were coachability, curiosity, intelligence, work ethic, and prior success. Those were our 5. And I have found through my experience that those 5 correlate pretty strongly in a lot of evangelistic startup type situations, because you can see that those elements would apply to that context.
And I liked how you dive into coachability, but one I was really curious about was curiosity.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that? I mean, why is that so important?
I don't think that would be important for like living social.
Right.
Or companies that are like call it Yelp. I don't think curiosity would be important for Yelp because they're calling on small business owners, highly transactional. Usually people have a clue what's coming. But anytime that it's more of a complex consultative sell, that curiosity, I think is really critical. And one thing that I often coach people on, they're like, how do I get good at sales, or how do I develop my curiosity? I'll say, when you're out on Friday night at an event, or if next time you go to a wedding or something, maybe even a networking event like this, go up to a stranger, introduce yourself, and start asking them questions about what they do, what their life's like, etc. See how long you can ask them questions before they get annoyed. You know what I mean? Like, you're really good at curiosity when you can you're asking questions, they build on each other. They're showing that you're genuinely interested. And if you're really good at it, you can ask questions that challenge their thinking and teach them something just by asking the questions. And that's what great curiosity is. I've gone to events where I'll walk up to a stranger, have a half-hour conversation with them. They don't know anything about me except my name, Mark. I asked them question after question, and they went off to their wife and were like, that guy Mark, he's an amazing guy. And all I do is ask questions. And that's an A+ on curiosity when you can do something like that. And in the sales interview process, I mean, you can get a sense of it when you meet someone in the corridor. When I come up and meet a candidate, is it awkward and like they didn't do their research on me and they're just like, hi, I'm here for the interview? Or are they asking me questions about myself and feeling genuine, and then through role plays I get a good sense of it as well.
I think that rolls into this one thing that, again in the book, that really I thought was worth highlighting. And talk about
the only thing?
Really, I mean, much of it was just, yeah. I mean, if you bought the book, I mean, I don't know what you're doing.
Mark used it to fall asleep every night.
It's very comforting. But this one thing you mentioned about buyer-seller, doctor-patient. Because we think about the way that we talk as salespeople, when we get in conversation with prospects, it has this buyer-seller feel. It's like you feel like you're talking, you're trying to pull information out, and it just seems painful. I mean, how many of you had like painful conversations over a phone with a prospect, and it's going nowhere, and you're trying to ask questions, and it's failing, right? And you had a really good observation about that, and I think changing that paradigm away from buyer-seller.
Yeah, I'm currently listening. I listen to audiobooks on my commutes, and I've finally gotten around to Daniel Pink's To Sell is Human. Anyone listen or read it? And he did some really good research around, he just did some general research of like, interviewed like thousands of people and said, what do you think about sales? Like, what's the first words that pop into your head? An extraordinarily small amount of people had a positive connotation. Right? It was really negative, it was sleazy, right?
It's not surprising.
And like, we were able to get away with that as salespeople a decade ago when we had the power. You know, it's like, yes, we could get away with these sleazy tactics because people had to talk to us to buy stuff. And the internet changed everything, right? Like, we as buyers now have complete empowerment, we have all the information. If we can't buy it online, we can just call up the company and purchase it. And now there's no longer a tolerance for something like this. And that's something that we tried to embed in our sales team and our go-to-market, is to have this, like, instead of always be closing mentality, have an always be helping mentality. And a lot of this starts with just really knowing to be able to walk in the shoes of your buyer and really be able to connect with them and personalize the experience to their needs throughout the whole experience. And I try to think, like, who can we look up to for this? Is there a company? And the only thing I could think of was a doctor, right? Like, when I go and see the doctor, and she comes in and she's like, you know, she comes in, she looks up on the computer. First up, she knows that I was in the emergency room 5 months ago with a sprained ankle, and she knows that they gave me Vicodin for it. She knows that my grandfather died of colon cancer. She has all the context before I even told her anything. And her questions are related to that context. And then she asks me what my issues are, and then when she asks me questions, I'm not like withholding information because I see the diploma on the wall and I trust her, right? And I know she's there to help me. And when she says, this is what you have, take these pills, I'm not like, let me think about it, or can I get 20% off? Right? She's like, I buy the pills, no questions asked. And that's where we need to evolve as salespeople and as a sales industry, is that's really what sales should represent. Is I should be reaching out to my salespeople because I have a problem, and I know they've solved that problem for so many people, and I've got a great deal of trust. And when they say that I need something, I should know that I want it, and I'll buy it, and I'll have a good experience. So that was just the best analogy that I could come up with.
Yeah, it actually reminds me, a friend of mine, Jeff Hoffman, who's up in Boston, and you probably...
Advisor to Hubspot, fantastic guy.
Yeah, so, and he had a really interesting perspective on that, and he called it student-teacher. Right? So, but very similar paradigms. You got to get out of that kind of buyer-seller conversation or engagement and really flip it over and think about ways of drawing people in and to start to have that type of open-ended questioning and that process. But yeah, it's very much like a very interesting thing, and it also calls to mind a lot of like the old school tactics that you bring up in the book around things like the way we manage lead lists or the way that we introduce things. And so can you maybe speak to a little bit of those topics,
Yeah.
like things that you've changed completely, like the elevator pitch, for example, or the call, the classic call high. I mean, what did you find that worked in your situation?
It's a really interesting time for sales because sales is so driven by buyer behavior, and buyer behavior is going through such a dramatic change. But I feel like sales is lagging behind in their best practice development. And I think a classic example to highlight Mark's point, and then we can generalize it, is the growing number of inbound leads that companies are getting, right? Like 20 years ago, I mean, a salesperson didn't get an inbound lead. They might get a business card from a trade show, but they didn't get an inbound lead. And more inbound leads are flowing into these companies. And it's pretty amazing. We'll have this customer success team at HubSpot working with a customer, and they'll call me up and say, Mark, I've got this customer. They're doing great. They've been a customer for 6 months. When they joined, they literally had 5 leads a month coming through their website. There was nothing. They did everything we told them. They have 500 leads a month coming through the website. It's awesome. But the sales team thinks the leads suck. Can you get on the phone and try to figure out what's going on? And 99 out of 100 times it's the exact same thing, which is they've got this sales team that's traditionally trained. They're traditionally trained to cold call, which means they build a list of the C-level executives they're going to call, and they know how to deliver an elevator pitch that resonates with that C-level executive, something around profit margin or revenue growth or COGS or something like that, and that's how they're going to pursue the account. And now the inbound lead comes in from a really good company, perfect fit for the organization, but it's not the C-level executive. Because the C-level executive told the director, who told the manager, who told the associate, who told the intern to do the research. Now, and what does the salesperson do? Well, they call the intern up with the elevator pitch that was designed for the C-level executive around COGS, and the intern's like, what's a COG? And the salesperson hangs up the phone and is like, that lead sucked. And so it's just a misappreciation for this new context. Now, what you do with that, first off, just appreciate that that's the context you have. That is a good lead because it's a trigger that something's going on in that organization that's probably related to your value prop. So much better than a cold call. But we have to treat it differently. So we can just ignore the inquiry from the intern and just call the C-level executive and say, hey, I've been getting a number of inquiries from your company on this topic. Give me a call. That's fine. That's a decent approach. I personally like to call the intern and just appreciate who the intern is. Like just ask, like, why'd you download the ebook? Who told you? Help them for 15 minutes, even though it's just the intern. It's not a buyer, but they could be a valuable coach to me. And if I'm successful in winning their trust, I can ask them questions that could be useful to me, like who told you to download the ebook, and what's your boss on your case about these days? And what did the CEO talk about at the last company meeting? And now I'm in a position to call the CEO or the CMO or whoever with much more value, right? So, it's not always about call high with that generic elevator pitch. And I think a lot of these need to be challenged today. I think the big one going around today is mail merge, right? There's a lot of technologies these days where it's like, I'm a salesperson, it's the last 2 weeks of the quarter, I'm behind. Cool, I can dump my 300 accounts into a mail merge, write this fancy email, and 2 of them will raise their hand and I'll make my quarter. But what happened to the other 298 who had this really poor experience with this unpersonalized email? So it's like salespeople love these technologies to help us cheat, but I'm not sure that stuff's actually going to be sustainable.
You mean like just personalizing with someone's like first name is not enough? That's not doing it? Yeah. It's amazing because obviously you probably got many of the same type of emails that are just very generic, and obviously there's no thought put into it, yet we have more and more technology that are coming online that just help people do that. So we're being super, super efficient at doing really bad things. When as opposed, we should be doing things that are more effective and figuring out ways, if it's effective, it works, do that better, do that more efficiently. Like we reverse things.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, we've always disliked the words marketing automation and sales automation because they were automating bad behavior. And we've always gravitated toward marketing transformation and sales transformation. And that's, as business leaders, that's the way we need to think about it is, let's not try to make the bad behavior faster. Let's try to rethink how we're going to market to better align with today's buyer.
And maybe not get into the whole questions like the classic band. Actually, you had a really good perspective on band, which is, again, that kind of old school perspective. Okay, these are the questions I should ask. So I actually like the questions that you thought about, the way of qualifying things that works a little bit better in this buyer's journey age.
Do you guys know BANT? Okay, so BANT is budget, authority, need, and timing. I think IBM came up with it like 40 years ago. So, any good sales team would have sort of a acronym around qualifying. It's not that salespeople are stupid, it's just that there's lots of things going through your head, and it's nice if you can simplify it down to a really simple set of things that you want to check off and uncover with your prospects. And we started with BANT actually at HubSpot, and I think BANT, I encourage startups to start with BANT. It's generic, it's fine. But we found that, number one, salespeople interpreted BANT as having to go in order, and the last things I want them to do is start a conversation by qualifying someone on budget, which I'm surprised that so many people actually do in Discovery 7. It's very self-serving. It's like the last thing I want to qualify. And we also found that the N, the need in BANT, was never, that's probably one of the most important. The N and the T are definitely the most important, need and timing. And it just wasn't developed enough. And it wasn't quantified, it wasn't implicated, that kind of stuff. So that's when we came up with GPCT, which is goals, plan, challenges, timeline. And that's worked really well for us in our context. I think it's transferable to some contexts. But so goals are, what are your business goals? The plan is, what is your plan to achieve those goals? The C is the challenges. So what challenges do you perceive in executing that plan? And the T is the time. When do we need to achieve these goals by? And that worked out really well to reframing the salesperson's mindset in that exploratory conversation.
What I like about that is that it really does speak to this whole idea of the buyer's journey, where you talk to a lot of people in the deal, and not all of them are going to be necessarily relevant or have quote-unquote authority, but they're all helpful for you to eventually get to the decision. I want to open it up for questions, but hey, if anyone here is big into the whole Twitter thing, it's Mark Roberge at Twitter. We're at enterprise_sale or hashtag B2B sales. So we love tweets. We even love Instagram, maybe Snapchat. Maybe not that. But a lot of folks actually, and I could start drilling through a bunch of questions that we received in the signups, but does anyone have any questions for Mark?
So talk about the marketing department.
Yeah, they're cool. They do marketing.
Yeah.
We like marketing. Marketing
How did you build that?
Yeah.
How's that interact?
Sure. So talk about the marketing department was the question for those watching on video. I think the biggest mindset that folks have to get in building a modern marketing department is an appreciation for the journalist and the content producer. And when we go out and speak about inbound marketing and the advantages of it over traditional advertising, I'll come up and get a CEO come speak to me after and say, Mark, that was inspirational. I'm going to start blogging once a week from here on out. And I'll be like, no, you won't. Wasn't that the whole point? Like, yeah, but you're a startup CEO. What are you working 70 hours a week? I mean, you might do it for a week or a month or two, but like a fire is going to happen. And we as executives need to think about building up a content production process. The second hire I think we made in marketing at Hubspot was a reporter for the New York Times. And so that's what you have to think about. And the good news for us, sort of mediocre news for them, is their industries are not exactly on fire. I mean, you guys are experiencing here in New York. I mean, magazines and newspapers are not crushing it today. And what that leaves is a bunch of extraordinarily gifted people out there not knowing how to reinvent themselves. And we just need to put one and two together and realize that they hold the keys to the future of marketing and demand gen and and lead gen, right? So that's really the core essence of our marketing department. I mean, today I can't quote it exactly. I mean, we have sort of a top of the funnel team that is there to drive visitors to us. So they're largely in charge of the blog and the social media presence and that kind of stuff. Then we have a middle of funnel team that's there to try to optimize the percentage of those visitors that are converting to leads and then nurturing those leads to be sales ready. So they're working on deeper types of content like ebooks and webinars that would get someone to fill out a form and that can nurture them along to maybe request a demo or get into a trial. So, of course we have like PR and product management and that kind of stuff. But that's the essence, is I would think, try to get into a journalist mindset. Even for the startups, you can go to NYU and find a 19-year-old in the journalism program to probably come over every Friday for credit. Right? Like, this is not an extraordinarily expensive endeavor, but it's such a driver of your business.
Please.
Yeah, sure. Can you talk maybe about the sales scaling, how you scale the team, or how the sales team's management, how did you grow from and build this whole team, and how the challenges that you had in growing the team, and how you manage them?
Yeah, so question just on how did you even scale the sales organization?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long answer. Yeah, sure.
I think he has a really good book that if you haven't picked up, if you still
So I think the probably a framework to answer that within is appreciating the stage that you're in. Okay, so when I first jumped in, we hadn't sold before, right? So my journey there is trying to figure out all the product market fit stuff. Like who are we actually targeting? What's the message that makes sense? If I can start doing that repeatedly, how do I make that into a playbook and a sales process and a buying journey? That's all you're developing. And the biggest mistake that I see for companies at that stage is they built this product, they somehow got 5 of their buddies on it for beta tests, it went well, so yes, we have product market fit. And then they go and hire the VP of sales from like some huge company to come in, and that's the complete wrong hire. Even like a sales rep from that company is the wrong hire. Because those folks are used to big process. That sales rep joined when they had the whole blueprint, went through a month of training. You don't have any of that. What you want is someone like a little more innovative and entrepreneurial. Someone that's going to be able to dig in there, and for the first time, your company is going to make, 50 dials a day out to your market and get feedback. And if you have a salesperson that's just running through the elevator pitch and like not being innovative and listening and helping you pivot toward where the market's at, you've missed an opportunity. So at that stage, it's really just honing your product market fit. Now, once you have that, now you know who you're going after, and you have a repeatable playbook to go after them with. One of the foundational steps there is, as you build that playbook, don't build the sales process first, build the buying journey first. So think back to those like dozens of conversations you had, and don't think about what you were trying to do to the buyer. Think about what the buyer was going through. Like, oh, I may have this problem. Oh, I might not be able to solve it with my own resources. I may have to assess some options. I may have to pilot one. I have to make a decision, which means I have to justify it to my CFO and then buy it. That's the buying journey. So define that and then build a sales process that supports it. And you'll find that your salespeople and your buyers are more in sync. And especially even getting down to really tactical stuff like, what are the stages in your CRM? A stage around like, I gave them a demo or I sent them a proposal. Stay away from that. That's seller action. I can fake that as a salesperson. Instead, make it like champions letter verified, which means that I, as a salesperson, held an exploratory call with a prospect, and I sent them an email summarizing what I found. And I said, is this accurate? If so, please reply yes or tell me what I'm missing. That's champions letter verified. That's a much better stage, because that is based on buyer behavior, that they read it and responded, and it's very inspectable as me as a leader. Because there's no question whether or not something's at that stage or not. My pipeline's going to be more accurate, and I'm going to be more in sync with my buyers. And then from there, now you're starting to talk about like, now you're in sort of a management realm where it's like, okay, who's the ideal salesperson for us to hire? That gets back to Mark's conversation about how do you come up with those 5 traits, you want to build that stuff. How do I train our salespeople? So for me, like, I created this framework which was, my mission was predictable, scalable revenue growth. And there were 4 things that I was obsessing over as a leader, which was hire the same successful salesperson every time, train them in the exact same way, provide them with the same quality and quantity of leads every month, and then hold them accountable to the same process of working those leads. That's a pretty good engineering machine, that if I accomplish those 4 things, I'll probably achieve predictable, scalable revenue.
Okay.
So you identify the 5th quality of a good salesperson as success. Are you talking specifically about success in previous sales positions, or would you take a chance on somebody who had success in other areas?
Yeah, that's actually something you spoke about in the book quite a bit. So the question was, what do you look for when you look for success criteria in your hiring?
Yeah, so the 5th criteria is prior success. Excellent question. Does that have to be prior success in sales? The answer is no. Right, so we hired plenty of what we call BDRs, which are more appointment setters that came right out of school. And I actually took a chance on a number of people with no sales experience. I was a bit biased because I did have sales experience. And many of them worked out quite well. So prior success could be in sales, but it could also just like, what have you been doing professionally or personally, and did you raise to the top of we got the top of the game. I hired a professional comic that was on Comedy Central.
No.
I mean, he pursued comedy. He got on Comedy Central. He got anchored away from Jay Leno right before he was on. I mean, he was at the top of his game.
How did he do?
Great. Still there today, 6 years in. I hired a woman who was a professional celloist? I don't know what you call it.
Cellist.
My cellist, cello.
Yeah, okay, so a professional cellist for the Portland, Maine Symphony, like really reputable. I hired a gold medalist from the Olympics. She was on the 1994, I think, hockey team. Gold medal winner, never served before. Right, so there are ways, like on the college level, were you varsity captain? What was your GPA? Were you club president? Did you start that club? Like, did you do a company when you were in school? Did you start something? Like, these are all things, like, whatever you were passionate about and invest your time in, did you get to the top of your game? That's what I look for.
There in the back, Nicholas.
So now Hubspot is getting into the sales tool, right? Because that earlier. So when Hubspot started, the founder had a thesis about marketing. They created the term inbound marketing. They had this idea of how marketing should be done. Do you have equally a thesis about sales? And why is Hubspot entering sales? There's something different that other people are not doing that Hubspot should be doing? What is that mean?
So, question from Nicholas is, what are your thoughts around sales technology? Where are we heading?
Yeah, we think the same patterns unfolding. When we entered into the marketing software space, it wasn't new. Marketo, Eloqua, ExactTarget, they were all there. It's just that we felt like they were a little bit more automating the archaic practices, and we felt like because the buyer behavior had changed, because today's buyer was more empowered by the internet with information, that they weren't as receptive to advertising and trade shows, and I think a lot of companies were seeing that. And that this internet wave empowered them around inbound marketing. We think the same is applicable to sales. As we look out to the different technologies available to salespeople, it's automating the same processes of cold calling and generic elevator pitches and calling high and doing the generic demo that everybody else sees and presenting everybody.
All the bad things just faster.
Yeah, the same 2 case studies, the same ROI analysis. And we think that inbound selling is about really appreciating the unique person, their unique context, by leveraging all the information that they came to you on. Did they do a Google search? What pages did they look at? What blog articles did they read? What ebooks did they download? I need to know that as a salesperson going into the pursuit. And I need to approach it with a helpful attitude up front, as opposed to trying to push someone into a demo to show them my pitch, which they could have just watched online. Right? So we think the exact same premises occur, that while the modern marketer needs to do marketing that aligns with the way people buy, the modern seller needs to do the same thing and change and transform their tactics to align with the modern buyer.
So you each have a term for it?
Inbound sales.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think about it is, just like in the marketing days, we were all about push. Now it's more about pull. It's the same about sales technologies. A lot of our technologies are just push, 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 but we need to be doing a better job of getting the pull.
Yeah, I agree. And don't confuse it, like, yes, it's optimal to have a big stream of inbound leads and sell to an inbound lead, but this isn't restricted to that.
Exactly.
Even when you're targeting these 5,000 companies and none of them are coming to your website, there is a way to reach out to them in a way that feels more personalized and more inboundy than just spraying those folks with the same elevator pitch every single time.
Andrew?
You talked about building sales teams and giving them an equal number of leads, trading them in the same way, et cetera. So there's a chicken and egg in terms of how you ramp up marketing and how you ramp up sales. Which order do you see? Like, salespeople with a quota bring a certain number of deals, or I have to have enough leads before I bring on the salespeople?
So the question is, what do you rank first? Marketing or sales? Maybe both?
Yeah, I mean, I would ramp marketing first in this day and age, and I think a lot of companies, you're smiling big. What's your role at the company? Yeah, I know he runs marketing for them. It's another one of those things where I think people are slower to change to, and that's something you could take advantages of a founder or a new company, is lean into marketing sooner. Will you be able to generate the lead flow to fuel your ever-growing sales team? Probably not. I hope you can last a couple quarters, if not a couple years, because the economics behind your business and the health of it will be much better. But, you know, I don't like it when I see someone with a plan to hire, you know, 10 or 20 new salespeople and they've got a one-person marketing team. You're way undervalued, and your cost per sale is going to be really high. And that's going to come out in your business model. It might force you to go further upstream, and further upstream might be a more competitive area, and you'll never be able to go back downstream because you have to increase your prices. So it's a really dangerous pothole to fall into. And I would lean into marketers first, and within that marketing department, I would lean into journalists first.
Let's give you a few more questions. In the blue.
Steve Roberts.
Steve.
You were talking about all the different technology we have today that we didn't have before. I guess the question I have is, you're saying we're not using it, or in most cases, as effectively or efficiently as we could. Do you think that behavior is at the salesperson level, or do you think it's how middle management is leveraging those tools and driving behavior?
So I guess the question is, what's driving poor usage of all these great sales technologies that we have to avail ourselves? Is it salespeople, management, leadership?
Yeah, I think that's highlighting another big change we're going through right now, the whole B2C to B movement, freemium movement. So I think historically, enterprise software, the decision was made by the leadership team. And the value props and goals behind the decision was based on the goals that the leader had. Right? So I think most purchases of a CRM come from that. Like, CRM, like, I haven't met a lot of salespeople who are like, yes, we're implementing CRM. You know, like usually it's like, damn, this is gonna slow me down, and now I have to add all this data, and my manager's gonna play big brother on me. It's like, so I think that's the root cause of this issue, that a lot of these technologies are underutilized. It's because the C-suite bought it and tried to force it down on the front line, but there was no what's in it for me for the front line. And I think thanks to folks like Dropbox and Atlassian and, you know, Slack, there's this new B2C to B movement where today's CIO is not trying to like listen to the CEO and come up with the vendors and software that aligns with the strategy. I think today's CIO is just trying to keep up with the software that the frontline workers are adopting, and just to make it secure and make sure they're capitalizing on all the synergies that can come from that. And I think we're on the verge of having a better context around usage because of that. You know, in our own pursuit into the sales arena, we did not build the use cases that the leader wanted. If anyone looked at our CRM in the last 6 months, you probably got super frustrated. We didn't have reporting. We just came out reporting two months ago, and that was like the 12th feature we built, because the sales reps don't care about reporting. What did we invest 2 years in? We invested in building a tool that helped them see which prospects open their email, because that's super valuable. And we got like hundreds of thousands of salespeople that test it and love it. And it automates the data entry. And now it's a much easier to sell to be like, okay, yes, we just added reporting, and I get Mr. VP of Sales that we don't have all the features you want, but your reps love this tool. Right? So I think the software world is going through a transition itself thanks to this B2C to B movement, and hopefully we'll see less shelfware and more, you know, user adoption from the front line.
Yeah. Let's be honest, I think there's plenty of sales managers that are way too dependent upon those sales reports as well. It's like, are you leading, or are you just looking at a bunch of reports in Salesforce or whatever? All right, we'll take one last question. I'm trying. All right, C. I gotta have you
Okay.
ask a question.
So what were some of the biggest mistakes you made?
Yeah, lots of them. So seriously.
A couple. No, I mean,
The first big one I made was not specialize in the team soon enough. You know, I think we were 2 or 3 years in. I probably got the team at that point to probably 20 or 30 salespeople. And we were very fortunate in those days to have so many inbound leads. And we were just rotating the leads amongst everyone. And like you could literally, as a salesperson, get a 5-person plumbing company, and the next lead you could get was like into it. You know, so it's like, and you know, you had some reps, and that was just like, it was just
random.
You know, domain expertise and maturity, I think, on my part, where, you know, I had some reps that were like, you know, Mark, I love those small company leads because they're so easy to get on the phone, but I hate the big guys because they never pick up the phone. And I had other folks who were like, I hate those small company leads because they have no money, but I love the big guys because they have plenty to spend. So light bulbs went off, and I quickly specialized the team, and I think it was way too late. I think for the companies that I advise, you know, even around 3 or 4 salespeople, If I'm going after a reasonable range of a target market, I'm going to think about specialization. I'll give you one more. I think as you scale, the rules of engagement amongst the sales team becomes really, really important. And what I mean by that is, making sure that the rules are crystal clear, because your sales team becomes large enough that they start fighting over accounts, and they start thinking that should have been mine, and that should have been mine, and more effort is put into like fighting over deals and seeing a customer close and researching to see if you can get a piece of it, as opposed to just going out and closing your business. Or more time is spent seeing a new customer that you think you can call, but you have to go through half an hour of due diligence just to make sure that you can actually call it. And I was surprised, as we grew to a certain scale, how much intellectual horsepower had to go in to make that super simple and super crisp and hold the team accountable to those rules to preserve the culture. Right, so that's another.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we didn't really talk much about culture tonight, and that was actually the topic of last month, but you did actually have one real interesting cultural aspect I wanted to touch on, which was how you built the compensation, because obviously compensation is such a big driver of behavior of the sales team. And you had this really great perspective on team-based objectives.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that particular point came out through the way we structured sales contests. And sales contests are unbelievable tools for you guys as executives. We would run a contest every month, and we would change the contest based on the behavior that we were trying to push through, whether it was like more pipeline generation, learning a particular skill. The best contest I ran, actually, the team at the time was really having problems forecasting, accurately forecasting. They weren't taking it seriously. And so I told the guys, we're like, okay, here's the contest this month. You get a prospect all the way down to the demo stage. Do a demo. You have that day to decide if you're going to close that prospect by the end of the month. Okay? If you think you're going to close them by the end of the month, go on the whiteboard, write their name down, and write a score of 0 to 100 next to their name, depending on how confident you are.
That's great.
And at the end of the month, we're going to look at the board. And for everyone you close, we'll circle them and add up the score. But everyone you don't close, we'll subtract them out. And if you do close someone that's not on the board, I'll give you a free 20 points. The winner had a score of -70. So they're like, gosh, Mark, you're totally right. So, but to get into Mark's question on the contests, was we never ran a contest for the first 3 years where there was one winner. We always set the contest up to be team-based. So if there were 12 salespeople on the floor, we had 4 teams of 3. And the prizes were always team-based prizes. Like, it wasn't just cash, it was like, go on a booze cruise, or go down to the casino together, or go golfing together. And that, I think, had a big impact on our culture. Because what you saw was people helping each other out because they wanted their team to win. Salespeople are competitive. They wanted their team to win. So if someone was lagging, they naturally wanted to help, and that behavior translated to everyday behavior. And then it was cool to get the pictures back at the booze cruise or the golf outing with the team hanging out. 3 years in, we ran our first individual contest. That was the first time we had the backstabbing and the cheating and that kind of stuff. So something to think about is the effectiveness of contests and set them up in the right way around team-based.
Yeah, and really do take sales culture into consideration. It's such a driver of everything. And next month, in January, we're going to be talking about motivation and mindset, so kind of an even deeper level, but all these things are really critical. I mean, all the things that we'll talk about today build upon making sure that as a leader, manager, even as an individual rep, you always think about the culture. Think about the culture, think about the mindset, the motivation, and all those other things that start to come into play.
Can I do one quick special real quick?
One-
Two quick little things. Number one is, you heard about our free CRM. It's at hubspot.com/CRM, especially for the startups in the room. Give us a shot. It's free. We intend to make it free forever. The other one is the proceeds of the book. If you didn't notice, they go to an awesome nonprofit called build.org. Build. Is anyone associated with them? They have a pretty decent presence here in New York. They're on 4 or 5 cities, going on like 20 this year. And what they do, I was just like blown away when I found this organization. They go into the largest cities in the country and find the absolute worst neighborhoods and worst high schools in those areas, and kids that are going to end up in gangs and on the street and all that kind of stuff. And they introduce them to entrepreneurship. And they put them through a 4-year program from freshman year to senior year and teach them how to start a company. They literally start their own company. The graduation rates for high school, I think, from the kids that participate is like 99%, and then I think 75% end up in college. So 100% of the proceeds go to that book. So just keep that in mind. Build on it.
And we have plenty of books up for sale. Definitely pick one up. Mark is going to stick around, sign books if you wish, and just have some time to ask your questions. I do want to touch on a few last minute points. We have a really great talk, January 19th, Tuesday here, with Gerhard Schwanda of Selling Power Sales 2.0 on mindset motivation. He's done a lot of really great research on how it actually plays out into sales. Again, thank you for coming out this evening, joining us for this talk with Mark Roberge, and happy holidays.